"Do you desire me or just the cure?" the princess asked. Unzipping her suit for the human, Lyra floated through the narrow corridors of her ship, her movements precise and graceful. The nebulan expanse stretched endlessly outside the ship's translucent walls, a swirl of distant stars and drifting asteroids glowing faintly in colors her human visitors could barely imagine. She had ruled her people with intelligence and care, but now, facing a mysterious disease that had begun to strike her crew, she felt a weight she had never known before. This disease was subtle at first, almost invisible, but it grew stronger with every passing day, leaving her strongest officers weak and her scientists desperate. She had called for help. Ethan arrived a few hours later. The human stepped onto her ship with a careful confidence, his own suit reflecting the lights of the corridor. Humans were rare here, and he knew it. He had traveled far through uncharted space to answer her call, not knowing exactly what he would find but drawn by the challenge. The moment he stepped inside the ship, he noticed the beauty of the alien architecture, curved walls that seemed to flow like liquid, soft lights embedded in the surfaces, and holographic panels that floated silently in midair, displaying streams of data in colors he had never seen before. Lyra greeted him in her precise manner, standing tall in her suit, which clung to her in ways both practical and elegant. She had always maintained a distance from others, but she could not hide the exhaustion that shadowed her eyes. "Welcome, human," she said. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." Ethan bowed slightly, a mixture of respect and curiosity in his expression. "The journey was long, but I am honored to be here, Princess Lyra. I have heard much about your people and your ingenuity. I hope I can help." Lyra led him to the infirmary where her crew rested. Machines hummed softly, scanning bodies and monitoring vital signs. Several officers sat quietly, their faces pale, their energy drained. Ethan knelt beside one of them, taking readings with his portable scanner, fascinated by the complexity of alien biology. "This virus," he murmured, "it's unlike anything I've seen. It seems to attack the cellular energy sources in a way that slows metabolism but does not kill immediately." Lyra watched him closely, curiosity mixed with hope. "Can you help?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. "I believe I can," he said, "but I will need full access to your ship's medical systems, and I will need to understand your people's physiology in detail. This will take time and care." She nodded. Time was something she did not have in abundance. "The disease spread slowly but relentlessly. You will have my full support," she said, and then paused. "I trust you, human." Over the next several days, Ethan worked tirelessly. He moved between the infirmary, the laboratory, and the ship's main control room, analyzing data, running simulations, and consulting Lyra about her crew's biology. He marveled at the complexity of her people, how their circulatory systems differed, how their immune responses reacted to stimuli, and how delicate yet strong their cellular structures were. He realized that the solution would require not just science but ingenuity, understanding, and a touch of human intuition. Lyra often watched him as he worked. There was a quiet fascination in how humans approached problems, directly with focus and adaptability. He asked questions she had never considered, suggesting methods and experiments that were unorthodox but promising. She felt a spark of admiration for him. More than that, she felt something else, a pull she did not yet understand. Humans were strange to her, but Ethan's presence made her heart feel lighter, even amid the tension of her failing crew. Their interactions grew subtle but charged with quiet energy. A hand lingered on a console slightly longer than necessary, a shared glance that held more than curiosity, and moments of laughter that broke through the tension. Lyra found herself explaining parts of her culture, her people, and even her fears in ways she had never shared with anyone. Ethan listened, genuinely interested, never judging, never interrupting. One evening, as they both worked late, a sudden alarm rang through the ship. A containment breach had occurred in one of the research chambers. Lyra's eyes widened, but she did not panic. She moved with calm precision, gesturing for Ethan to follow. Together, they entered the chamber. A small container of experimental samples had cracked, releasing harmless but volatile nanites that floated in the air. Ethan quickly adapted, using his portable field device to stabilize the environment, while Lyra guided him through the layout of the room, showing him where each delicate mechanism was located. They moved in sync, a human and a princess, problem-solving as one mind. When the alarm ended, they both stood in the center of the chamber, breathing slightly heavier. Lyra looked at him with something unspoken in her eyes. Ethan smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his face, unaware that the small gestures between them carried weight she could feel deeply. "You handled that well," she said softly. "I did not expect humans to adapt so quickly." Ethan shrugged, though his chest swelled with pride. "We learn by doing," he said, "and I have a good teacher." His words were casual, but there was sincerity in them that made her pulse quicken. Days passed, and Ethan made progress. He isolated several factors that could help stabilize the disease, but he also realized that a critical component required Lyra herself. Her physiology held the key to the cure, a part of her biology that could be safely sampled but needed careful handling. Lyra considered this request seriously. Allowing Ethan access to this part of herself required trust, something she was not accustomed to giving. Yet, she saw the honesty in his eyes and the dedication in his work. One night, as they reviewed data in the laboratory, Lyra hesitated before speaking. "Ethan, there is a part of the process that requires my participation," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of vulnerability. He looked up immediately, attentive and calm. "I understand," he said gently. "We can proceed carefully, only when you are ready." Lyra nodded, appreciating his patience. She was used to giving orders, to being in control, but this was different. Here she was vulnerable, and yet for the first time in a long while she felt safe. They continued working late into the night, side by side, their hands occasionally brushing over consoles and instruments. Each touch was fleeting, but it carried unspoken meaning. Lyra's mind wandered as she watched him concentrate, thinking how rare it was to find someone so dedicated, so intelligent, so human in their approach to the universe. She wondered, not for the first time, if her feelings were tied solely to the urgency of the cure, or if they were something deeper. Ethan, unaware of the thoughts racing through her mind, noticed the faint smile she gave when a simulation succeeded. "Your crew is resilient," he said quietly, "and you are remarkable." Lyra felt a warmth she could not name. She looked down briefly, adjusting a console, and then met his gaze. "You humans are different," she said. "Your way of seeing problems is refreshing." "I did not think I would find it so comforting." Ethan smiled, a small, genuine curve of his lips. "I think we are stronger when we work together," he replied. "Different strengths, different perspectives, that is how progress is made." The quiet night stretched on, filled with the soft hum of machines and the distant shimmer of stars outside the ship. Lyra and Ethan continued their work, the bond between them growing stronger with each shared moment. The disease that plagued her people was serious, but for the first time, hope felt real. And hope, she realized, could come in many forms, not just a cure, but the presence of someone who understood her, who respected her, who made her feel more alive. As the first signs of dawn appeared outside the observation windows, Lyra paused, letting the soft light wash over her face. She thought of her people, of the cure, and of the human beside her. In that quiet, unspoken moment, she felt a flicker of something she could not yet name. Desire, affection, or simply trust, perhaps all three. Ethan looked up from his instruments and noticed her staring at the stars. "It's beautiful," he said. "Even out here so far from home, there is beauty," Lyra nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "and sometimes beauty is found not only in the stars, but in the company we keep." And so, the first day of their collaboration ended, not with a breakthrough or a victory, but with the beginning of something neither of them had expected. In a galaxy filled with unknown dangers, the strongest force was already at work. Human ingenuity, kindness, and the fragile growing connection between a princess and a human next morning, Lyra entered the laboratory with a quiet determination. The soft glow of the ship's systems reflected on her suit, making her seem even more composed, even more untouchable. Ethan was already at work, surrounded by floating holographic panels that projected intricate patterns of alien DNA. He looked up and gave her a nod, his expression a mixture of focus and subtle warmth. "Good morning, Princess," he said, though his voice was casual, friendly, human. "I was just reviewing the latest simulations. The disease is clever, it adapts faster than we expected. But I think I may have found a pathway we can exploit." Lyra's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. She stepped closer, examining the data. "Explain," she said, her tone calm but insistent. "I need to understand this before we move forward. My people's lives depend on it." Ethan swiveled a small console toward her, highlighting strands of alien RNA and cellular sequences. The disease weakens the crew by reducing their energy production at the cellular level. If we can stimulate a particular enzyme in their biology, we can slow the disease's progress and give the immune system a chance to recover. But the enzyme is linked to your unique physiology, Princess. I will need your cooperation to fully isolate it. Lyra paused. The words were clinical, but their meaning weighed heavily on her. To help her people, she had to trust him with something deeply personal, something that most of her advisors had never seen or touched. She had never felt so exposed. Yet she also felt something else, a quiet confidence that he would handle it carefully. "I will help," she said after a moment, her voice steady. "But I must observe every step. Nothing is done without my understanding." Ethan smiled, a small curve of his lips that carried respect and relief. "Of course, we proceed slowly and carefully. Your safety comes first." Days turned into nights as they worked together. The ship was quiet except for the hum of the machinery and the occasional beep of diagnostic equipment. Ethan analyzed samples, ran simulations, and adjusted his methods according to Lyra's guidance. She watched him constantly, fascinated by his patience and ingenuity. Unlike the rigid protocols of her own people, he approached problems with flexibility, thinking creatively, sometimes in ways that even she had never imagined. In return, Ethan observed her. He noticed the way she moved, precise and elegant, and the way her mind worked, calm, deliberate, and constantly questioning. She was brilliant, but she also carried a vulnerability that she hid well. Her leadership, her beauty, her grace, it all struck him deeply, though he reminded himself that this was a professional engagement. Or at least, that was how it was supposed to be. One evening, as they both reviewed genetic sequences projected in holographic panels, a soft chime indicated a minor malfunction in the life support module of the laboratory. Ethan immediately moved to correct it, but Lyra stopped him. "Wait," she said. "We can handle this together. You may have the skill, but I know this room and its systems better than anyone." He looked at her, slightly surprised. "I didn't mean to take over. You thought you should act first," Lyra said with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It is human instinct, yes, but sometimes patience is more effective." Ethan laughed softly. "I will remember that, patience over instinct." Together they fixed the module, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Each touch was fleeting, but it carried weight neither of them could fully express. Afterward, they paused and looked at each other, sharing a quiet moment before returning to their work. As the days passed, the enzyme required for the cure became clearer. Ethan needed a sample from Lyra's cellular structure, something she could provide safely, but it would involve precise measurements and intimate understanding of her biology. She considered this carefully. She had always been cautious, careful not to allow anyone too close, physically or emotionally. But Ethan had proven himself trustworthy. She could not explain why, but she felt an unspoken bond growing between them, a connection that went beyond science. One night, she stood at the observation window, looking out at the nebulan expanse. Ethan joined her silently, his presence steady and reassuring. The stars shimmered in endless patterns, distant suns and swirling nebulae-forming shapes that seemed almost alive. "You seem troubled," Ethan said quietly. "Is something on your mind?" Lyra did not turn to face him immediately. "It is the responsibility I carry," she admitted. "I must save my people, and yet to do so I must place my trust in someone else. It is not easy." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she expected. "Trust is difficult, but sometimes it is necessary. You are not weak for relying on me. You are strong for knowing what must be done." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight outside. "And what of your feelings?" she asked softly. "Do you work for my people, or are you drawn to me in ways that have nothing to do with this task?" Ethan hesitated. The question was unexpected, and yet he had been asking himself the same thing for days. He took a deep breath. "I came for the work, Princess, to help your people, but I cannot deny that I care for you, more than I should perhaps, but it is true." Lyra studied him, her own heart quickening. The honesty in his voice, the sincerity in his gaze, it was rare, almost frightening in its intensity. She nodded slowly. "Then we proceed with honesty," she said. "I will allow the procedure, but only if we are truthful with each other. No secrets, no pretenses." Ethan agreed, and the next day they began the delicate process. Lyra positioned herself carefully, guiding Ethan as he prepared the instruments. She watched him work, marveling at the care and precision he demonstrated. Every movement was deliberate, every action gentle. She had feared vulnerability, but his presence made it feel safe, almost natural. They worked side by side for hours, sometimes pausing to discuss results, sometimes simply sitting in quiet observation. Their conversations shifted from technical to personal, small stories of Earth, of human habits, of laughter and mistakes. Lyra found herself enjoying these moments more than she expected. The hours of tension and focus were balanced by the simple, human joy of companionship. One afternoon, as they analyzed a particularly complex sequence, Ethan reached for a control panel. Their hands met briefly, brushing against each other. Both paused, feeling the electricity of the touch. Lyra did not pull away. She did not speak. The silence carried meaning, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection forming between them. "You are different from anyone I have met," Ethan said softly. "Not just because you are a princess, but because you think in ways I cannot predict. You challenge me and yet you guide me. It is inspiring." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. "And you," she replied, "are different as well. I expected a human to be brash, impatient, perhaps reckless. But you are careful, considerate, and willing to learn." "I did not expect that." Days of meticulous work began to yield results. Ethan isolated the enzyme in question and began preliminary tests. The simulations were promising. Lyra's people were beginning to respond positively to the theoretical cure. Relief washed over her, tempered by cautious optimism. The disease was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but hope existed where there had been only fear. During one quiet evening, Lyra and Ethan stood together in the observation deck, looking out at a field of distant stars. The soft hum of the ship was a comforting backdrop to their thoughts. "I never imagined," Lyra said, "that a human could understand my people so deeply, or me." Ethan turned to her, his expression earnest. "Understanding comes from care, and I do care. Not just for the work, not just for the mission, but for you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She felt a warmth she had never allowed herself to experience fully. "Then we must continue honestly," she said again. "Every step, every choice. No illusions, no doubts." Ethan nodded. "Always." And so, the nights and days blended together, a rhythm of work, discussion, and quiet companionship. Each step brought them closer to the cure, and each shared glance, each small touch brought them closer to one another. Lyra had begun to wonder if this connection was more than temporary, if perhaps the human beside her represented something larger, a reminder of humanity's strength, of courage and empathy, of the ability to see clearly through fear and uncertainty. As the laboratory lights dimmed for the night, Lyra and Ethan prepared for another round of testing. The enzyme had been successfully isolated, but integration into the cure would require careful monitoring. Lyra's hand lingered over the console, brushing against Ethan's. Neither spoke immediately, the silence carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of what was happening, not just the science, but the bond forming alongside it. For Lyra, this partnership was no longer simply about duty or obligation. It was about trust and something more, a quiet thrill, a sense of anticipation she had not known in years. And for Ethan, the work was no longer just a mission. It was about connection, about a responsibility and a feeling he had never expected to find so far from home. As the stars shimmered outside, the promise of a cure and the promise of something deeper hung in the air between them, fragile yet unbreakable. The journey was far from over, but hope, for the first time in weeks, felt real. The ship's lights were dimmed to a soft glow as Lyra and Ethan worked in the laboratory, the quiet hum of machinery filling the room. The samples were prepared, the enzyme isolated, and the next phase of the cure was ready. This step required something delicate, something that Lyra had hesitated to allow, her active participation in the synthesis process. It was safe but intimate, and it required her to place complete trust in Ethan. Lyra stood near the console, her hands brushing lightly over the smooth surface. She had spent days preparing herself for this moment, going over every procedure in her mind, thinking of her crew, thinking of the responsibility she carried. And yet another thought gnawed at her, Ethan. His presence had become more than professional. She felt drawn to him, though she did not fully understand why. Ethan noticed the hesitation in her movements. He moved closer but kept a respectful distance, his voice calm. "Princess, there is no rush. We only proceed when you feel ready." Lyra nodded, appreciating his patience. "I am ready," she said after a pause, though even she could feel the tremor in her voice. "But I need to know, are you here because of your duty or because you care for me?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly at her question. He had been expecting technical questions, procedural clarifications, but not this. He considered carefully, wanting to answer honestly without breaking the trust between them. "I came for your people to help your crew," he said slowly. "But yes, Princess, I care for you. More than I expected to. You are remarkable, and I respect and admire you deeply." Lyra's heart beat faster. His words were sincere, gentle, and they stirred something within her. She had known for days that a bond was forming, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. She studied him, taking in the subtle tension in his posture, the concentration in his eyes. "Then we proceed together," she said finally, "with honesty and care." The procedure began. Lyra carefully positioned herself as Ethan guided the instruments, explaining each step before he touched anything. Her hands hovered over the console controls, ready to intervene if necessary. Every movement was deliberate, slow, and controlled. Ethan mirrored her focus, adjusting settings with precision and monitoring the holographic projections of the enzyme interactions. Hours passed, filled with quiet conversation, careful observation, and mutual respect. They discussed the nature of the disease, the adaptations of Lyra's people, and the possibilities that the cure could bring. And yet, beneath the clinical dialogue, there was an undercurrent of emotion, small gestures, lingering glances, the occasional brush of hands. Each touch, each look, carried a weight neither of them could fully express, yet both were keenly aware of it. At one point, Ethan paused, adjusting a delicate sensor. Lyra noticed the faint tension in his shoulders. "You are thinking too much," she said softly, almost teasingly. "Focus on the task, not on me." He looked at her, a small, wry smile appearing. "It is difficult," he admitted, "when the task is important and yet the person beside you is equally remarkable." Lyra's cheeks warmed slightly, and she quickly returned her attention to the console. She felt a flutter in her chest, unfamiliar and distracting, but she reminded herself of her duty. This was about the cure, about saving her people. Everything else, her feelings, the quiet attraction she felt, was secondary. Yet, as they continued, it became impossible to ignore the subtle tension between them. Ethan's careful handling, his gentle words, and the honesty he displayed drew her closer emotionally, even as she tried to maintain professional distance. She found herself watching him work, fascinated not just by his skill, but by the care and respect he showed. The enzyme began to integrate successfully, and the simulation results were promising. Lyra's people could be saved, but the final step required one more contribution from her, a direct interaction that would solidify the cure. She took a deep breath, preparing herself. "Ethan," she said quietly, "the final step, it requires me to participate fully. Are you sure you are ready?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes, I am ready, Princess. I will be careful and we will do this together. Every step is guided by caution and respect." Lyra nodded. The words comforted her more than she expected. She positioned herself at the designated console, following Ethan's instructions precisely. His hands moved over the instruments, adjusting settings, measuring samples, and monitoring the holographic projections. Every movement was careful, respectful, and deliberate. As the process continued, Lyra felt a strange mixture of anticipation and vulnerability. She was placing trust in someone she barely knew, yet she felt safer with Ethan than she had with anyone else. He worked silently, focusing on the task while remaining aware of her comfort and reactions. When their hands occasionally brushed over the instruments, neither pulled away immediately, both aware of the silent acknowledgement between them. Hours passed and the integration neared completion. The holographic display shifted, showing the enzyme successfully stabilizing within the simulated cellular structures. Ethan glanced at Lyra, his expression soft. "It is working," he said quietly. "We are almost there." Lyra allowed herself a small smile, a rare moment of relief. "I can see it," she said. "My people, they will survive this." Ethan looked at her, and for a moment the scientific task faded into the background. The room felt smaller, warmer, filled with unspoken understanding. He wanted to say more, to reach out and bridge the distance between them, but he remained professional, knowing the importance of trust and consent. Finally, the last adjustments were made. The enzyme was fully integrated, the simulation confirmed stability and the cure was complete. Ethan carefully recorded the final data, ensuring that every step could be replicated safely. Lyra watched him work, a mix of pride and admiration swelling within her. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it." Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. "No, princess," he said gently. "You did it. I only guided the process. Your contribution, your trust made this possible." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She had expected gratitude, respect, even relief, but not this deep, quiet acknowledgement of her role. She realized that the bond between them had grown far beyond professional necessity. For a moment they stood in silence, the hum of the machinery a gentle backdrop to the emotions swirling between them. Lyra's mind wandered to the question she had asked herself many times. Did Ethan desire her, or only the cure? She had the answer now. It was not just the cure he sought. It was her trust, her intellect, her courage, her presence. Ethan, too, felt the shift. The mission had been the initial reason for his journey, but now, standing beside Lyra, he understood that his feelings were real. He admired her, respected her, and felt a deep connection that could not be explained by logic alone. Lyra finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Ethan, I need to know something. When this is over, will you stay or will you return to your world?" He considered carefully. "I will stay," he said after a pause. "Not because I must, but because I want to. There is so much here I want to learn and so much I want to experience. With you, if you will have me as a companion, not just as a human scientist." Lyra felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, hope, and something tender she had not named before. "Then we move forward," she said softly, "together." The following days were filled with careful implementation. Ethan supervised the distribution of the cure to the crew, monitoring their responses and making adjustments as necessary. Lyra stayed close, guiding him, observing, and learning. Each successful recovery was a victory, each smile from a crew member a testament to their joint effort. And yet, their moments of quiet together continued. Late at night, when the ship was still, they would stand together at the observation deck, watching the stars. They spoke of home, of Earth, of the galaxies beyond, of hopes and fears, of the strange similarities between humans and Lyra's people. Each conversation deepened their bond, blending respect, admiration, and an emotional connection that neither could ignore. One night, as the stars shimmered in the nebulan expanse, Lyra turned to Ethan. "You have changed the course of my people's lives," she said quietly, "and you have changed mine as well." Ethan met her gaze, his expression tender. "I did not mean to," he said softly. "But sometimes the heart chooses in ways the mind cannot predict." Lyra smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and recognition. "Then I suppose we both must navigate this carefully, just as we did with the cure, with honesty, respect, and patience." He nodded. "Yes, princess. That is how we will continue, together carefully and honestly." And so, in the quiet of the laboratory and the glow of distant stars, the human and the princess shared a connection that was both fragile and unbreakable, built on trust, care, and the knowledge that they had created something extraordinary, not just a cure, but the beginning of something deeper, something human and enduring in the vastness of space. Lyra knew that challenges remained, that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, she felt hope, not only for her people but for herself. She had found someone she could trust, someone who saw her not just as a princess or a leader, but as a being capable of thought, emotion, and connection. Ethan, too, felt the shift. He had come for science, for challenge, for the chance to make a difference. And yet he had found more: friendship, trust, admiration, and perhaps even the beginnings of something rare and beautiful. As the ship glided through the nebulan expanse, the stars reflected in the wide observation windows, Lyra and Ethan worked side by side. Their hands sometimes brushed over consoles, their voices shared in quiet conversation, their hearts quietly acknowledging the bond forming between them. The cure was complete, the crew was safe, and yet something even more extraordinary had emerged. A connection built on respect, honesty, and the quiet recognition that they had found something rare in the vastness of space. Each other. The first rays of the distant star filtered through the observation windows, casting soft light across the laboratory. Lyra and Ethan had spent the night reviewing the final data, checking and double-checking each parameter to ensure the cure would function as intended. For the first time in weeks, the pressure felt different, not urgent but hopeful. The disease that had plagued her people no longer felt like an unstoppable force. It could be defeated, and the responsibility for that success lay in their hands. Ethan worked with calm precision, coordinating the deployment of the cure to the crew. He had adapted his human methods to Lyra's technology, combining his ingenuity with her people's advanced systems. Holographic displays hovered above the consoles, showing cellular responses and predicting the effects of the treatment. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes focused, her mind sharp, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. She realized that the presence of the human beside her, his focus, his dedication, his gentle humor, had become a source of comfort she had never expected. The first administration was to a group of officers who had been weakest. Lyra observed closely, noting every reaction, every subtle change in their vital signs. Ethan guided her hand, showing her how to monitor the enzyme's integration safely. The procedure was delicate, precise, and required complete attention. "This is it," Ethan said quietly, his voice low but steady. "We are taking the first real step." Lyra nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. "Then let us proceed." The enzyme was introduced carefully, and the monitoring began. Lyra watched as the readings slowly stabilized. The pale, exhausted faces of her officers began to regain color, their movements becoming more confident. Relief washed over her, mingling with pride and a deep, quiet joy. She had feared that the cure might fail, that her people might continue to weaken despite all her efforts, but now the first signs of recovery were clear. Ethan watched alongside her, noting each improvement, each small success. "They are responding well," he said softly. "The process is working." Lyra's lips curved into a faint smile. "Yes," she said, "and it is because of you, your guidance, your skill, your patience." Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, Princess, you allowed it to happen. Your cooperation, your trust, your courage. It is your people who will survive because of you. I only assisted." The next several days were filled with careful administration of the cure. Lyra and Ethan worked tirelessly, monitoring responses, adjusting doses, and observing the subtle changes in the crew's physiology. Each success brought a new wave of hope. Officers who had been weak enough to fear permanent fatigue now walked the corridors with renewed energy. Scientists who had been too sick to analyze data were back at their consoles, sharing findings and proposing experiments. In the midst of this, Lyra found herself stealing glances at Ethan, noticing the way his eyes focused, the way his expression shifted when he discovered something new, the small smile he gave when a simulation succeeded. She realized that she had grown to admire him, not just for his intellect and skill, but for his integrity, his patience, and the quiet way he treated everyone with respect. Ethan, in turn, observed Lyra more closely than he had before. He had seen her strength as a leader, her intelligence as a strategist, and her skill as a scientist. But now he also noticed the small, human moments, the flicker of worry in her eyes, the faint relief in her expression when a crew member responded to the cure, the subtle joy she showed when a procedure succeeded. He felt a growing warmth toward her, a deep admiration and affection that went beyond professional respect. One evening, after a long day of monitoring, they both paused to rest. Lyra leaned against the observation deck, watching the stars outside. Ethan joined her, his presence steady and comforting. "They are doing well," Lyra said quietly, "stronger than I dared hope." "Yes," Ethan agreed, "and it is because of your leadership, your guidance, and your courage. You trusted me, and your people trusted you. That is what made this possible." Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You have changed the course of my people's lives," she said softly, "and you have changed mine as well." Ethan looked at her, understanding more than she expected. "We did it together," he said, "not just for the cure, but for trust, for collaboration, and perhaps for something more." Lyra felt a flutter in her chest at his words. She had tried to keep her feelings hidden, to focus on the task at hand, but now it was impossible to ignore the bond that had grown between them. The quiet moments, the shared laughter, the small touches, they had formed a connection that was as real and as important as the cure itself. As the days passed, the remaining crew received the treatment, and the results were consistent. Each recovery strengthened Lyra's confidence in Ethan's methods and deepened her admiration for him. She began to realize that the human was not just a brilliant scientist, but also someone who could understand her, who could respect her, and who could make her feel alive in ways she had not experienced in years. One afternoon, Lyra and Ethan were reviewing the final reports when a group of recovered officers entered the laboratory. Their energy was renewed, their movements confident, and their faces bright with gratitude. They gathered around Lyra, expressing their thanks and admiration. She felt pride swell within her knowing that her people were safe. Ethan watched the scene, a quiet smile on his face. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved them all." Lyra shook her head slightly. "We did it," she corrected, "together." The crew left and the laboratory was quiet once more. Lyra and Ethan stood side by side, their eyes meeting. There was a moment of silence, heavy with unspoken emotion. Lyra's mind wandered to the question she had asked herself many times. Did Ethan desire her, or only the cure? She realized that she had the answer. It was not only the cure he sought, it was her presence, her trust, her intellect, and the quiet bond that had grown between them. Ethan noticed the contemplation in her expression. "Princess," he said gently, "you have nothing to fear from me. I am here because I care for your people, yes, but also for you. I respect you, and I value our connection." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She stepped closer, their shoulders nearly touching. "Then we move forward," she said softly. "Together." They spent the rest of the evening preparing final reports, organizing data, and ensuring that the cure could be replicated in the future if necessary. The work was steady, focused, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection between them, a subtle warmth that neither had attempted to define, but both felt clearly. As the ship glided silently through the nebulan expanse, the stars outside the observation windows shimmered like distant promises. Lyra and Ethan continued their work, side by side, hands occasionally brushing over consoles, voices soft in conversation, hearts quietly aware of the bond that had formed. They had achieved the cure, restored hope to her people, and discovered something even more extraordinary, a connection that was built on trust, respect, and the quiet recognition that they had found something rare in the vastness of space. By the next morning, the crew was fully recovered. The ship hummed with energy, officers walking confidently, scientists sharing data, and the atmosphere alive with optimism. Lyra observed it all, her heart full of pride and gratitude. She had faced fear, responsibility, and uncertainty, and had found strength not only in herself, but in the human who had traveled across galaxies to help her. Ethan stood beside her, quietly observing the bustling crew. He had expected a mission of science, of problem-solving, but he had found something greater, a bond, a connection, and a sense of purpose that went beyond his expectations. He looked at Lyra, meeting her gaze, and saw in her eyes the reflection of his own feelings, admiration, trust, and a quiet affection that had grown steadily over the past days. Lyra spoke first, her voice soft but certain. "You have done more than cure my people, Ethan. You have given them hope, and you have given me trust. I did not know that I could feel so, connected to someone who is not of my world." Ethan smiled, a mixture of humility and warmth. "It was never just about the cure," he said. "It was about understanding, respect, and connection, and that is something I have found with you, Princess." For a moment, they stood in silence, the soft hum of the ship and the shimmer of distant stars surrounding them. Neither spoke, but both felt the depth of what had grown between them, an unspoken promise, a shared bond, and the quiet acknowledgement that their lives had changed forever. And so, in the quiet of the laboratory and the glow of the nebulan expanse, the human and the princess celebrated their success, not with words or grand gestures, but with the simple, profound understanding that they had accomplished something extraordinary. They had saved a people, restored hope, and discovered the rare, enduring connection that comes not from duty alone, but from trust, respect, and the quiet power of human ingenuity. The ship moved steadily through the nebulan expanse, its systems running smoothly and the crew fully recovered. Lyra walked along the corridors, observing her officers as they resumed their duties, their energy and confidence restored. It was a rare sight, her people functioning at their best after days of weakness, and it filled her with pride. She had worried, planned, and sacrificed much, but now she could finally breathe, knowing that her crew was safe. Ethan walked beside her, silent but present, carrying a tablet with the final readings from the cure. He had been instrumental, not just in the science, but in the delicate execution that had made the recovery possible. Lyra had watched him carefully over the past days, noticing the patience, care, and respect he displayed in every interaction. It had become clear to her that he was no ordinary human. He had a quiet brilliance and a heart capable of understanding and empathy that were rare anywhere in the galaxy. They reached the observation deck, where the nebulan expanse spread out in a breathtaking panorama of swirling colors, distant stars, and drifting asteroids. Lyra paused, letting the soft glow wash over her. She had spent countless hours here alone, pondering her responsibilities, her people, and the unknown future. But now, standing beside Ethan, she felt a new kind of clarity. "You have done more than I could have imagined, Ethan," she said softly. "Not just for the cure, but for me, for my people, for the hope that was lost." Ethan met her gaze, his expression steady, filled with sincerity. "I did what I could," he said, "but it was your guidance, your courage, your willingness to trust me that made all the difference. I only followed where you led." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest that she had not anticipated. "Then perhaps we led each other," she said almost to herself, "through fear, uncertainty, and hope." For a long moment they stood in silence, watching the stars. The quiet was not empty, it was full of unspoken understanding. Lyra's thoughts drifted to the question she had asked herself many times over the past days. Did Ethan desire her, or only the cure? The answer was now as clear as the stars outside. He desired neither the cure alone nor her as a prize. He valued her for who she was, for her mind, her courage, and the quiet strength that shone through her every action. Ethan broke the silence gently. "Princess," he said, "you have asked me before if I care for you or only the cure. I want you to know it has never been only about the cure. My admiration, my respect, my care, all of that is for you, for the person you are, not for what you can provide." Lyra met his gaze, her heart quickening. She had feared vulnerability, had worried that opening herself to trust would leave her exposed. But now she saw clearly that her fear had been unnecessary. He did not take advantage of her, he honored her. That alone was more powerful than anything she had ever known. "Then I trust you fully," she said softly, "not just for the cure, but for everything that comes after." Ethan's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I am honored, Princess." The ship's communications panel chimed, interrupting their moment. Lyra glanced at it and saw messages from her fleet commanders reporting their crews' full recovery and readiness to continue their missions. Relief washed over her, and she felt pride swelling in her chest. They had been at the brink, and now, thanks to the human beside her, they were fully restored. But beyond duty and science, Lyra realized another truth. The connection she felt with Ethan was no longer just a quiet curiosity or a fleeting interest. It was genuine. She had grown to care for him deeply, not just for what he had done, but for who he was. Ethan noticed the soft smile on her face. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Lyra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the stars outside. "I am thinking about what comes next," she said. "About choices, about the future, and about us." Ethan's heart stirred at her words. He had traveled across galaxies expecting challenges, puzzles, and unknown dangers. But the real journey, the one that mattered most, had been the bond forming between him and this remarkable princess. "Then let us decide together," he said. "No obligations, no expectations, only honesty and partnership." Lyra nodded, feeling a lightness she had not felt in years. "Yes," she said, "together." In the days that followed, life aboard the ship began to settle into a new rhythm. Officers resumed their duties fully, scientists continued their research, and the ship sailed through the expanse with renewed energy. Lyra spent time with Ethan, observing not just the crew, but the subtle ways he interacted with her people. He was patient with them, kind, and always willing to share knowledge without condescension. Lyra admired that greatly. It was a reminder that humans, though often underestimated, carried qualities that could rival the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Ethan, in turn, learned more about Lyra's culture and people. He marveled at their intelligence, their grace, and the quiet ways they had adapted to challenges over generations. He realized that humanity, with all its ingenuity, curiosity, and resilience, had found a rare kinship in Lyra's world. And in Lyra herself, he had found a companion who matched him in intellect, bravery, and heart. One evening, as they stood on the observation deck, Lyra spoke softly. "Ethan, I must ask, when this mission is truly complete, what will you do? Will you return to your world, or will you remain here?" Ethan considered carefully, knowing the weight of the decision. He could return to Earth, resume his life among humans, and share the knowledge and experience he had gained. But he also knew that he had found something unique here, something worth more than any discovery or achievement. "I will stay," he said finally. "Not because I must, but because I want to, because here I have found connection, trust, and purpose." Lyra's heart swelled at his words. She had feared the emptiness that would follow the end of the cure, the return to normalcy. But now she saw a future filled with possibilities. "Then we will continue," she said, her voice steady. "Together. Not as princess and visitor, but as partners, as equals, as companions." Ethan smiled, a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. "I cannot imagine it any other way," he said. The weeks that followed were filled with shared experiences, both professional and personal. Ethan assisted in the continued recovery of Lyra's people, teaching them new methods, learning their culture, and helping strengthen their systems for the future. Lyra, in turn, shared the intricacies of her world, from science to leadership to the subtle art of diplomacy among the stars. Their bond deepened, built on respect, shared experience, and the quiet understanding that they were stronger together than apart. There were moments of laughter, small adventures aboard the ship, and quiet nights spent observing the endless expanse of stars. Each moment was a reminder of human ingenuity, courage, and the quiet power of empathy and connection. Lyra reflected often on how rare it was to find someone so capable, so trustworthy, and so human, and she realized that she had come to value Ethan not only as a colleague, but as a true companion. Ethan, too, felt the depth of the connection. He had come seeking a challenge, a mission to test his skills. What he had found was far greater, a sense of purpose, a bond of trust, and the beginning of a partnership that promised to shape not just their lives, but the future of an entire civilization. One morning, as the ship approached a bright, shimmering nebula, Lyra and Ethan stood side by side on the observation deck. The colors danced across their faces, reflecting in their eyes. Lyra spoke quietly, almost to herself, yet directed at him. "Do you realize, Ethan, how far we have come? From strangers to partners, from fear to hope, from isolation to trust?" Ethan turned to her, his expression calm but filled with warmth. "Yes," he said, "and it is only the beginning. There is so much more to see, to learn, and to experience, together." Lyra smiled, a genuine expression of joy and relief. "Together," she echoed. In that moment, the ship sailed forward, carrying not only a healed crew, but two companions who had found something rare and enduring: trust, admiration, and the quiet thrill of connection in the vastness of space. The nebulan expanse stretched before them, full of unknown stars, uncharted worlds, and endless possibilities. And they faced it together, human and princess, partners in science, in life, and in the quiet, enduring bond that had grown between them. As the stars shimmered, Lyra reached out, brushing her hand against Ethan's. Neither spoke, for words were unnecessary. The gesture carried everything: trust, respect, admiration, and the beginning of something rare and beautiful. Humanity had once again proven itself, not through force or dominance, but through ingenuity, empathy, and the courage to connect. And so, the story of Lyra and Ethan continued, not with grand battles or dramatic confrontations, but with shared discovery, quiet triumph, and the enduring power of human spirit in a universe filled with wonder. The cure had saved a people, but the bond between human and princess had saved something even more precious: the hope for a future built on trust, connection, and the simple, profound understanding that together, anything was possible. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck, but for Lyra and Ethan, the greatest adventure was not out there. It was the journey they had begun together, hand in hand, hearts aligned, ready to face the vast, unknown universe as partners, equals, and friends bound by trust and admiration.